Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss how would you use the Azure Resource Locks, another Azure service that is free, but it's very useful. A lot of customers use this to prevent accidental deletion to its Azure resources or their Azure subscription. So you might use DevOps tools, and maybe junior in a team or even seniors might make mistakes and mistakenly delete the Azure resources. There is a technique that you can use, which is the Azure Resource Locks. We are going to see today how would you create it from the Azure portal. What is the Azure Resource Locks? We're going to look at the documentation and also how can you create the Azure Resource Locks using GitHub Copilot. Are you excited to make the Azure cloud your comfortable zone? Let's get started. All right, let's talk about the Azure Resource Locks. Although my mouse battery, is going to die, but let's see if it's going to survive this video or not. But basically, to get started, the Azure Resource Locks is basically a service that you leverage to protect your resources, your resource group, your Azure subscription from an accidental deletion. So if somebody tried to delete, the resource, it will prevent them from from deleting resources. Basically, it's another free service within Azure, which is a good thing. We love free stuff, and we use it here to protect the control plane. Okay, so if I have let's just think for a minute here. Let me just So you are a user here. Trying to send an API call to your Azure cloud. Okay, so this is the Azure cloud. We interact with the Azure cloud through the APIs. So these APIs could be the Azure portal. It could be the the CLI, PowerShell. Okay, and then this guy that's sending the API request could be a user, could be a DevOps tools, and so on. Okay, so whatever, maybe another service. It's gonna, whether it's within the Azure cloud or outside. So this is Azure. Okay, so what we discussed in the third video in the Azure beginner path, we said that every request get reviewed by the Azure Resource Manager, okay, or the ARM. So it validates two things: what are the policies enforced, and also what is your permissions, what is the role-based access control. So do you have owner, contributor, reader role, and so on. So when you send any API request, so you're gonna do post request, for example. So that's mean you are going to modify or create resources and so on. It has to check all of these. On top of it, these resources you have within the Azure subscription. Let's say you want to modify the virtual machine, you want to change the size, or maybe you want to delete the virtual machine. So if there is a lock on it, even if you have owner permission, which means that the god of the subscription, you won't be able to delete that resource. So this is what we call it, the Azure control plane. So the actual resource itself is control plane. So the locks get applied into the control plane of the resources, whether it's a resource group, whether it's an Azure subscription, and so on. But what happens is that if you're doing RDP or SSH to that VM, and we're going to see that on the demo as well. If you're doing RDP or SSH, so you are within the Windows operating system, there are files and folders. So you deleted those files. The resource locks won't be helpful here. So you need a backup solution. Okay, so you need to back up your files. So this is another thing. It's called the data protection. So then the Azure, Resource Locks basically applies on the actual VM that's holding this operating system on the Azure side. But anything within the operating system, once you connect to it, then it won't be helpful. Same thing if you have a storage account and then these storage accounts got containers, and then within that container there are files. Okay, so the same thing, if you deleted the files, the resource locks will not help you. But if you try to delete the whole resource, it will block you. If you try to delete the container that is holding the files, it will block you as well. Although there's an option to override the lock for the containers, but I mean, overall, the resource is protected by the Azure Resource Locks. So this is one thing that you need to understand. There are two modes within the Azure Resource Locks, which is also we need to understand. There is the delete, prevent deletion, or prevent or does what we call read only. Okay, so this will allow you to modify the resource. So whether you configure monitoring, do any changes within the control plane, this is allowed. But if you try just to delete it, then it won't allow you. However, in the read only lock here, it will just be read only. Okay, so anything that you try to change the size of the virtual machine or change any settings within a storage account or SQL database or artificial intelligence service, anything from the control plane will be blocked. Even sometimes when you list the you do post request or you list the storage keys, there are some funny things that could happen that you won't be able to view the keys. Although I've tested myself, it is working. But in the documentation, it says there are key considerations that could happen, that if you try to get the access keys from the storage account, you won't be able to do that if there is a read-only lock. To solve this problem, either you remove the lock or you use intra-ID authentication. So instead of you authenticate, which is the more secured option, of course, instead of you authenticate through the password of the storage account, which we will see in a minute, then you just use the intra-ID authentication, which is more secured option, and so on. But these are the top highlights that I wanted just to talk about before we jump into the demo. Is a lock is basically a protection layer on the control plane. You use it just for any non-expert people that you might junior in the team, although there's dev test environment that you can use and so on. But again, mistakes could happen even with the senior ones, or maybe somebody from the DevOps team mistakenly sent a delete request. So backups should be in place, role-based access control should be configured, but this is also another layer of protecting your resources from accidental deletion or something that's not meant to be deleted. And I've seen it a lot, some people might raise a support ticket and say, you know what, I don't have backups, and we mistakenly deleted our resources. So these safety measures in your Azure subscription are there to use it. And I highly recommend that you consider this one, since also it is free, so you're not paying money for that one. Now, there is a great article that I'm gonna leave it on the the YouTube description just to go through. I always like to point you out regarding this, but I just wanted to show you here. First is what it is, how many types of resource locks, cannot delete and read only. This is what we have discussed. Yeah, very important note here is the lock inheritance. So if you apply this within the subscription, all the resources underneath will inherit the resource lock. If you apply it on a resource group, then all the resources within that resource group will inherit the lock. So you need just to understand the hierarchy and how it works. And also you need to test out yourself. So basically here, it's talking about the control plane and the data plane. So this is the control plane. Anything that's touching management.azure.com. However, if you logged in within the your storage account, then the resource locks basically won't help you here. And then here it's giving you also another nice documentation talking about what is control plane and data plane. So if you open this one, then you will see here it's explaining exactly what I was talking about, or the differences between the control plane and data plane. And then if you go all the way down, it's going to show you how would you create the resource locks, which we are going to do today in the demo, but also showing you the different ways of doing it, whether from a JSON or JavaScript, or you do it with the newer version, the bicep templates, or even if you're using PowerShell, how would you do it, or even the Azure CLI or Python. Okay, so all of these are the methods or the ways to create this, the Azure Resource Locks. Today we are going to view it from the Azure portal, but also we're gonna use the GitHub Copilot. So we're gonna use the Azure CLI, but our helper here today is gonna be GitHub Copilot, which will help us how to create resource locks. Now let's jump into the Azure portal and see test the different scenarios here. So the default one here, if I review my role-based access control again, we're gonna discuss the role-based access control and Azure policy, but just in place, this is if I view my role here and I click on access control, under the Azure subscription, I have what we call it role assignment. So role assignment, basically I can view my role. Okay, so I can just view my access here, and I can see I've got owner, which is basically I can do everything. So this is basically the the God permission basically within the Azure subscription, and then it can show you here the different types of of permission that I can do over my tenant or my Azure subscription, sorry. And then here, this is also the data actions. So you can pretty much see that I can do everything, whether delete, view, read, whatever. So I can do everything here. Okay. Now, even if I have this permission, if there is a resource lock, I won't be able to delete resources. So let's test that. I have a resource groups here. So we have created this from the previous episode. Let's say if I have the VM resource group, or maybe let's just find, this one. This one is a resource group with a virtual network. If I try to delete this, absolutely it will be deleted. Okay, so I will paste this, delete, and then boom, the resource is gone. So it will take some time, and then it should delete the resource. Now, if I jump into the different resource group here, this one. So basically this one is another resource group. If you don't know about resource groups, you should go back to the previous episode. We discussed what is resource groups. But then I have a storage account here. So if I click on this storage account, again, if I delete this, it will be deleted. I can just scroll all the way down till I found Azure Resource Locks. So you can see lock with a lock icon here. This is where you can configure your locks. As I mentioned, if you go from the resource group level, like if I click on my resource group as well, I should be able to see the same thing, like settings, and then under settings there are resource locks. If I give the whole resource groups a lock, then any resource underneath this this resource group will also inherit the same lock, and we're gonna test that as well. But if I give just the resource, then it's gonna be just the resource. If I give the whole subscription, then all the resource groups and the resources will get the resource locks. So if I take a look here, I've never done it from the subscription before, but if I take a look here, according to the documentation, yes, can you see resource locks? Then I can add a resource lock here, and then I can just do delete or read only as well. Although if you go back to the documentation here, if you try to cancel the subscription, it will be canceled. But there is if you try to modify, if with read only and so on, it will be it will not allow you. But here it will tell you here when you if you try to delete any resource, for example, within the subscription, it won't allow you. But it tells you here, if you applied the resource lock in the subscription, the resource lock doesn't block the subscription cancellation. Okay, but even if you try to cancel the subscription and there are resources, it won't allow you, because it will tell you, hey, delete the resources first. So Azure preserve your resource by deactivating them instead of immediately deleting them. Azure only delete your resources permanently after a waiting period. Okay, so there are some safety features as well if you mistakenly cancel your subscription. So now I just wanted to show you from here, but this is the most common scenario where I might have resources that are not important, so I don't need to apply locks, and some other resources that I'm afraid of people to do mistakes, and then it could be like a big mistake if it's deleted. Then I just can apply it from the resource group level. But let's see from the Azure storage here. So from the Azure storage, if I go down here and applied locks, so let's now use the first delete. So this is prevent deletion. Okay, and then maybe you could add your notes, whatever this lock, add whatever. So now once it's created here, if I try to delete that resource from here, if I try to delete this one, so I copy, look at this error message is telling me here, hey, you're not allowed to do it. Why I'm not allowed to do it? Because basically there is a parent lock, so you cannot delete that resource. It can see that there is a lock, and basically it won't allow you. Okay, now this only gonna prevent from deleting stuff, but it won't block any modification within the resource itself. So now if I go under the Azure containers, which is basically a container for uploading files, any unstructured data, photos, videos, and so on. And let me just create maybe my files, very creative name. Okay, so I click on create. So my files container is created successfully. So if I try to delete, again, I can override the resource lock here. So here, as you can see, it says delete, there are delete locks on this resource, but if I do confirm, it won't allow me. But if I select this one, it will override the lock, and then it will delete it. So that's the only condition that you can this is a new actually feature. I've seen it, but again, it's there. But if I do my files again and then create, it's still, let's do my files too, so just gonna take time. My files too, and then I create. So as you can see, I have my files too. So now let's upload some data. So I can upload any data I want. So we're just gonna upload a single photo here, and then upload file. As you can see, I'm able to upload files. This is the data plane now. So if I try to delete this one, I should be able to delete it. Okay, so I also can delete the snapshot. So as you can see here, I'm able to delete the blob, the blob data files. That's fine. So because it's a data plane. So this is what exactly the documentation is mentioning. So if you notice the the URL of this container, if I go to properties here, it's saying HTTPS, and then the name of my storage account is storage mo ELA. This is the name of the storage account, .blob.windows. Whatever. If I go back here and then take a look at the look your Azure resources, the example here is mentioning if you go, it's protect the management.azure.com, but the Azure data plane, it doesn't touch it. So my account.blob.windows.net or whatever, this is not protected by the Azure Resource Locks. So which is true. You cannot you cannot protect the data within the Azure files. One way is to protect your data is either you're gonna configure, it's actually one way is to configure the what we call it, the just forget it. So let me stop. Soft delete. So you need to configure the soft delete option, which is under the data protection here. You should be able to see enable soft delete. So soft delete for blobs, you can keep it for whatever. It depends on your organization, policy. But as I mentioned, like, you could add from 7 days to whatever. So you can just keep, like, the content. Even if you deleted the files, you can enable the self-delete option, and it has many different, there is also Azure Backup for blobs, which is another service we can talk about. But again, there is a soft delete option that you can enable. So if somebody like mistakenly modified or corrupted or whatever, then you just can restore it from like, the soft delete option. Okay, so that's the first way. So again, if I go back to the Azure Resource Locks, again, it prevents resources. If I delete this, so let me just refresh. Like, if I go back to the resource group itself, if I add like, a lock from here, also delete, so delete, rg delete. Okay, so if I apply this as well, if I go from the like, my Azure storage here, the Azure storage, like from the locks, doesn't have any locks here. So, but again, it inherited this because the scope is from the Azure resource groups. So again, if I try to delete this, it is the same thing. It's just basically, what is the benefit? So instead of if I have here hundreds of resources, instead of I go to each resource and configure the resource locks, so the resource groups comes here very handy, because again, you just can do it one time, and then all of the resources underneath will inherit the resource lock. If I have multiple locks, like let's say on resource groups and here, but the most restrictive one is gonna apply. Okay, so if I have read only, I think that delete is having the upper hand, or more strict, like more, that does have more restrictions. So the the delete is gonna be applied from the parent level, even if there is a read only one. So if I go down here now, let's take a look at the read only, or maybe the opposite. I don't remember. You need to validate that. But if I go back here to to the Azure Resource Locks again, so let me change this one to, instead of instead of delete, let's do the read only option. So if I click apply, now my resource group is inheriting also the read only. So if I check here again under resource locks, so it says here parent resource locks cannot be edited. So that's mean there is a lock applied to that resource. So if I click here, trying to, let's say, modify. So if I try to modify, basically add a container and then test 2 maybe, then I can't. As you can see, there is an error, and it's telling me basically there is a lock. I can also ask Copilot if it's my first time trying this. I can actually ask Copilot to troubleshoot for me, and then Copilot will tell me, hey, yeah, on this resource you have a resource lock, so please remove that lock. So basically that's how you do it. So it's saying here, this is the correct resource? Yes. And then so what is pretty cool about Copilot for Azure, it understands what's happening in the sessions, same as GitHub Copilot. And then it can troubleshoot, and then it tells you what's the problem. I think, I don't know if it's so maybe I cannot modify the resource. Why? Let's see what's the output. As you can see, it's checked, and then it says here the error message you encountered that there is a resource lock, so please remove this one, and so on. Okay, so this is how you troubleshoot with Copilot here. If I go back again to this one, I'm just gonna show you the one last example here, which is basically use the GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot, but let me just delete this first, and then remember, this is the dev VMs RG UK001. So if I get back to GitHub Copilot here, I was just in case of you don't know, resource lock will work on the post. So if you don't know what are the HTTP requests, or the most common HTTP request. There is get, there is post, there's put, patch, delete, and so on. You can go back to the API basics, but basically here the post sends data in the request body used to create resources or send commands. So if you're gonna create resources or send commands, then it's gonna be blocked. And I think also delete, which is remove resources from the server or the URL, also is gonna be blocked. So this is how you understand the basics of the HTTP requests. So if I go back here, I'm in the Azure, like I'm logged into my account, but so basically like I have Azure CLI installed here, and I am gonna switch my Copilot here to the agentic mode, which means that I want GitHub Copilot to do actions. I give access already by just logging to my Azure subscription. So I do AZ login, and then I hit enter. It will ask me to sign in with my account. Then I will be able to get my resources. Now, if I just ask Copilot here to, hey, list my resource groups, then it will just show me here what are the resource groups, like, you know, so it's asking me now, I'm gonna run AZ group list and then output in a table. I'll say fine, allow, and then it will run that one. Yes. Hold on. Yeah. So as you can see, it ran like, you know, this against my resource groups. Then I will just say here, I want to apply or create Azure Resource Lock. Name is Cloud with Mo. Then like maybe also the effect will be delete. Okay, and apply it on all resource groups. So it will just now it will do that. So it's basically it's gonna use the command az lock create, and then it will just apply this on resource groups, on these resource groups. I think it will go one by one because again it's not using a, like, you know, a bicep template or like, you know, a PowerShell script, so it has to run this command 3 times. And now boom, I have these 3 resource locks applied. So if I want to check from the Azure portal, I should refresh here. I will see Cloud with Mo. So as I showed you here, if you understand the graphical user interface, then you can like pretty much use the CLI with GitHub Copilot, and then you will be able to create your, like, you know, your resources using the infrastructure as code. So you just need to understand the actual service features, the configuration and everything. And then once you are good to go, then we will move to like, you know, the bicep course, which will show you the method or how, like, you know, the syntax, the command to use, how would you build your bicep templates, but using GitHub Copilot, which is a different way from the traditional one. Like, instead of you learn everything on your own, you just can use the Copilot as your like, you know, your guy or your guide to help you. But also it can give you kind of examples. Okay, so let's, like, you can brainstorm. If I go back here, say, like, let's say, hey, I am learning, so you can just go by ask, or maybe the planning as well. I am learning how to create Azure resources using Bicep. Give me some examples to think about, and then maybe just set, like, you know, or build the templates for you. And then you start to, like, you know, practice with GitHub Copilot and with the documentation. I will show you all of this in the future episode, but I hope this, like, you know, video was helpful for you. I hope my video was useful for you. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.